The Knicks are not running enough. They're not hitting transition enough, especially not the starters. And it's leading to a lot of missed opportunities. But I want to see just how good they were in both those facets too, the half court game and running in transition. And the results were pretty staggering. Like, so per cleaning the glass is what I use to get these stats. The Knicks are 12th highest in the league in percentage of plays in the half court at 80.6%. They are 19th in points per play in the half court. So almost the bottom third of the league in points per play in the half court at 0.921. Now, conversely, they are fifth in points per play in transition at 1.314, and they're 22nd in frequency as far as the transition game at 14.1%, meaning 14.1% of their possessions are in transition and 80.6% are in the half court. I'm not 100% certain where the extra 5% goes there. If that's maybe maybe they count free throws towards it or something like that. Maybe the free throws are the remaining 5% there or something along those lines. But I mean, no matter what, it underscores this problem that the Knicks don't run enough, even though they're really good at it. Like I said, they're fifth in the entire NBA in points per play in transition, which has, I think, a lot to do with a certain player I'm going to highlight in a little bit. But like, they just insist, especially with the starting lineup, on grinding to a halt every time that they come down the floor when you have some pretty good transition players. Like Fournier, I think, has shown some good ability in transition this year to get out ahead of the pack and finish in traffic and things like that. RJ Barrett obviously is great in transition. You know, we've seen him for a while now. Mitchell Robinson, in theory, would be good in transition, but he's definitely been pretty slow this year, which I know you're going to get into in a minute. But I just think that the Knicks need to commit to getting out in transition more and trying to generate good shots that way, because clearly when they do, it's working for them. But they kind of just have made this conscious decision. Even now with Kemba Walker benched, you know, I thought that maybe we'd see the Knicks running more with Kemba benched, but I don't have numbers from just the last like 3 games, but I do not feel like they're running more now with, you know, Kemba out of the lineup than they were with him in the lineup, just based off watching the games. It seems like they're still determined to just kind of slow it down every play. And worse yet, they've been doing a lot of isolation in those half court sets. So they're not even generating particularly good looks that way. So my hope is that the Knicks can find a way to start embracing transition a little more going forward.
Yeah, so that feeds well into my first stat. So according to Cleaning the Glass, all four of, and this was in Macri's newsletter this week. So shout out to Knicks Film School as always. All four of Julius Randle, Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier, and Mitchell Robinson rank in the bottom 20th percentile of the league in on-off differential for frequency of transition plays. So what that tells you is the starters do not run a lot, and they particularly do not run a lot relative to the bench guys. And to some extent, there's good reason for that, right? Because outside of Julius Randle, they are not very good at it. Julius Randle is in the 79th percentile in the NBA in points per play in transition. Evan Fournier is in the 41st percentile. RJ Barrett is in the 13th. Mitchell Robinson is in the 12th. Kemba Walker is in the 6th. Or that might just be relative to guys on the Knicks, but just relative to guys on the team. All the starters don't get out very often, and outside of Randle, they're not very good when they do get out and run. And that's why, to me, it was so exciting what we saw from Julius in the Nuggets game, a little bit in the Bulls game, I think a bit against the Nets too. He started playing with more pace, and not necessarily defensively. There were still some struggles in terms of that, but we saw him come out as a pseudo point guard and push the ball and create buckets that way, like whether it was like a little dribble handoff to RJ or just making a really quick cross-court pass to Fournier. And for a Knicks team that, to your point, has not been very good in the half court this year, they need to leverage all those pseudo transition opportunities. And it's what you see from Emmanuel Quickley every time he's in the game. He is sprinting up the court and creating chances where there otherwise wouldn't be any.
Yeah, and you know, it's really like Obi Toppin too is constantly running out
Yeah.
like a wide receiver. It's funny that you brought up the distance traveled numbers too. I didn't look up like individual players to see how that went because I was trying to just prove a point with the whole team. But I was gonna look up the entire team numbers and put them in here, but honestly, it just didn't. Quite frankly, you look for stats to support your point. It didn't support my point because the Knicks actually are like top 12, I think it was. I looked up their like total distance traveled, and I now I'm kind of curious. I might do this like going into next show or something. I'm really curious to just look it up and see like is Obi Toppin literally and like quickly and maybe like Rose literally
Yeah.
accounting for like 2/3 of the Knicks distance traveled, because they're, according to like NBA stats, their distance traveled, they're actually in defensive distance traveled, they're almost near the top, which really surprised me because I don't feel like that bears out when you watch the team. But maybe it's just them all constantly scrambling to get to shooters that they end up having to cover more ground. But with that, they're super high, and with the offensive, amount traveled too, they're actually, I think they're like top 15, so they're in like the top half of the league. But so much of that has to come from the bench, and like I just feel like there's been this weird thing too where the bench and the starters just can't seem to find a consistent way to play between the two units, and that doesn't do anything to help the Tibbs's sort of mentality of this like platoon shift, of not really mixing those two units very much. So hopefully if the starters could start embracing transition a little more, which has clearly worked so well for the bench, then maybe we could start seeing a little more commingling of the two units too, and then maybe find some better combinations to work with going forward.
Yeah, this is a point I heard Fred Katz, the athletic beat writer, make on the Bank Shot podcast, but it's sort of underrated that everyone talks about the Knicks' lack of transition, but they don't really talk about the lack of movement in the half court. And that's an area where Obi Toppin is just fantastic, right? We saw him have that great backdoor cut that he took from Derrick Rose, got a reverse layup off of it. I think that was in the Bulls game, if I'm remembering correctly. But outside of that, there's just not a lot there. And Randall, I mean, give him credit, especially in that Nets game. He was picking the Nets apart just by hitting shooters cross court again and again and again. And that game, the Knicks had some good subtle movement, but it was really all derived because Randall was consistently drawing double teams. And I think Julius is such a weapon as a high post passer. The best way to leverage that is to play him with a lot of guys who will move off the ball, which is a further argument for him and Obi Toppin getting more minutes together. Because right now there just aren't a lot of other guys on the Knicks who are particularly invested as backdoor cutters. To me, that's an obvious area that RJ Barrett can be a little bit more active in to get going. Certainly something we will talk about down the road.